you basically are creating your own kind of world when you're able to kind of just sit with yourself and kind of let your imagination just wander.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I'm your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. Where's the Party? The latest children's book from Scott Casperson is described as the story of a cupcake rediscovering, quote, joy within its community and the comfort of being alone, end quote. That intrigued me, especially the part about finding comfort in being alone. So I read it. In this episode, Scott and I discuss his motivation for the book, my reaction, and the skills kids need to be content without screens or other people to entertain them. Talking About Kids is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. I don't need to remind you that authors like Scott Casperson do not come on this podcast to meet me. They come on to try to get their positive messages out into the world. You can do your part by sharing this series with your friends and your professional network. And now, the interview.
I live in Los Angeles, and
Mhm.
I moved here from Chicago to kind of pursue the arts, not only on stage, but also behind the typewriter. So I was trying to kind of do both. And kicking things around for a while, trying comedy and whatnot. I then got into working as a concierge at a hotel, meeting wonderful people from around the world. Then got the opportunity to actually go over and live in Japan as a teacher, which was a whole different trajectory that I had not really ever thought or plotted for. I had been in advertising for many years prior to that, so I kind of enjoyed the kind of finer art of marketing and so forth. But going over and teaching in Japan kind of helped me to kind of look at things in a kind of elementary way because I was working with children.
Mm.
And while there, an opportunity came up to create something for my class for one of their holiday parties. And so I came up with this event, this activity where the kids would exchange gifts every time they heard a word, because it's all about listening, right? Giving them
Right.
that opportunity to really catch English words and comprehend it properly. So years after that, I really kind of thought that story had some legs, and just kind of decided to open up my own wallet and make
Mm.
something of it and publish it. And so from that point on, I really started to take myself seriously as a writer. And I thought that children's picture books was a beautiful marriage of visual as well as the written part, which is kind of what film is, what entertainment
Mm.
is, right? You create something on paper and then you put it up for others to view and to critique. So that's kind of the long story about how I got started into being a children's writer.
And today we're talking about your book, Where's the Party, which stars a cupcake named Kip as the main protagonist here.
Yes.
And, longtime listeners of Talking About Kids will know that this is something I always struggle with. How much of the plot do I give away? Now, granted, these are for children, and my listeners are most likely not children. So we are going to give away a little bit of it, but I
Sure.
still want, for example, I know that even in your materials, you talk about there being some unexpected things in this book. And so maybe I won't give that away so the readers get to enjoy that for themselves. But a lot of this book, you are explicit about it being to help children appreciate being alone.
Hmm.
So Why did you choose to explore being alone?
So going back to that actual first book that I wrote, which was called How the Candy Cane Got Its Stripes, Christmas story,
Mm-hmm.
the push of that was actually being able to just kind of appreciate what you have around you for the holidays. Namely, you may not be able to get home every year to spend it with family, which was kind of
Mm.
what I was going through living in Japan. I couldn't fly back. So celebrating the holidays abroad and away from family and loved ones was a little tough. So the
Mm.
story, although it was written to kind of introduce vocabulary words to kids, is basically about like just the power of friendship because we always have our friends
Right.
with us, right, wherever we go. So that kind of set the thing in motion about exploring that topic later, about just being comfortable with yourself. And then basically the story that you mentioned, Where's the Party? That's book number 7. So other stories in between kind of had their own little, nuggets of morals and whatnot. So this one, I decided to kind of take that and run with it. And the basis of it is basically how also we tend to um, we over exaggerate how great other people have it.
Mm.
And in this day and age of social media, this is nothing new. I mean, there's clinical studies that go about how actually spending time on social media can make us depressed because everything
Right.
looks so wonderful and rosy with everybody else, but our own life kind of stinks. So this idea of this particular character, Kip, thinking that it's been abandoned, it's been ostracized, it's been left out of something great.
Right.
And he gets all worked up in this tizzy, and now he's on this quest to find out where is this party.
Right.
And so along the way, yeah, he kind of becomes a little bit more comfortable with just kind of that time alone. And so that's kind of where this whole thing just kind of like snowballed. Was
Yeah.
just kind of like I thought there was something there, and I didn't seem to find this topic really being explored, at least in a humorous way, when I did some research on the matter with other books out there. But that's kind of where I felt like this is something worth sharing.
And I have to agree because a lot of books cross my desk, a lot of books written for this age group, and this is a topic I haven't seen addressed before. Um, there's a part of it I want to come back to, but before I do, I have to imagine that you had to that this writing this made you think about what are those skills, what are those aptitudes that allows one and that allows a child to be alone
Mm.
and be comfortable being alone and maybe even enjoy it. And what did you conclude about that? What are these skills that young children might need?
Well, an imagination helps.
Mm.
Going back into my own childhood, I was the class clown. I was kind of like the center of attention, but yet I had this bipolar part of me that was really comfortable and really craved just being by myself, uh, where I can control the narrative. And
Mm.
so whether it was going into the woods or just hanging out in the backyard with my toys or something, you basically are creating your own kind of world when you're able
Right.
to kind of just sit with yourself and kind of let your imagination just wander. Um, and again, I was very lucky because this is before instant gratification, where you could just pull up any YouTube video and watch your favorite episode of Tom and Jerry or whatever it may be. So you kind of were stuck with basically creating your own magic.
Right.
It's it's funny. I guess I was very lucky because I had parents also who didn't scold me for bringing home the weirdest of things. So whereas children tend to kind of like collect oddities, I was first and foremost a big fan of that. So
Mm.
emptying my pockets before doing the laundry was an adventure for my mom. So, and I think part of that was you as you walk around, you could just find the strangest of things, and you're like, oh my God, this is so amazing. I could use this somehow,
Right.
some way, and so your mind just starts to kind of go off on tangents about what this little thing that you just found, this piece of garbage, could possibly. I remember one time I actually picked up. shattered glass from the road. But obviously, and now thinking back on it, it must have been like a car accident because it broke in such ways that it was small little pieces, right?
Right.
Which looked like diamonds. So
Mm.
I was picking these things up and keeping them in a bag, thinking that I had a bag full of diamonds. And I knew they were glass, but in my mind, it was a prop. It was just like
Right.
something to use later on whenever I wanted to play either, good guy, bad guy, whatever it may be. So these kind of things really, I do think, help let children kind of enjoy that solitude. Um, and 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 anything that can be done to just encourage imagination, um, is going to produce wonders. I don't think you even have to be creative.
Hmm.
I think this, doesn't require,
Right.
giving them an art kit or anything like that. It's just a matter of just the littlest of things around them can be anything. Which is actually kind of what my next book's about. But that's kind of where things were with me, and I think if parents are wondering, well, how do you nurture this ability within my own child? I guess that could be it. I mean, obviously restriction to some extent of media would be a
Well,
huge help, if
you know,
possible.
if if your materials hadn't said, the materials that accompanied your book when it was first introduced to me, if they hadn't said that this is about being comfortable being alone, that that's one of the themes in it, I might have inferred, and I'm going to argue here, Scott, that I think that this is part of what the appeal of this book and what's happening here is also being present.
Hmm.
So, what Kip, and again, we are talking about an anthropomorphized cupcake when I say that, what Kip manages to do, in spite of the fact that he is on this quest to find this party, is that every time he encounters an experience, something new, something interesting, and he encounters that in the form of a bookshop or a museum or a farmer's market,
Hmm.
he actually takes the time to enjoy it. He's present to it.
Hmm.
And so I think that is something that all of our children need to learn, especially children who are in environments or communities or have the resources where they're so programmed.
Hmm.
They're always going from one thing to the other, and I see, and I'm guilty of this with my own life and my own family, that we are spending all this time planning and scheduling, and then when we're in the middle of the thing, we're worried about getting to the next thing,
Hmm.
and we're not present to it. I don't know if anybody else had pointed out that part of what Kip is able to do is actually enjoy those things when he sees them.
No, it's a great observation. I guess what I was thinking of was when he was in these places searching for the others.
Yeah.
It was almost like he was rediscovering it because
Mm.
a lot of times we do take for granted what is around us.
Yeah.
So, like for example, the scene in the park, playing on the different pieces of equipment and whatnot, taking it all in. As you pointed out, being present, I kind of looked at it as from the standpoint of rediscovering just
Mm-hmm.
kind of the stuff that we've just forgotten about, which I don't think you can do when you're surrounded by a lot of stimulus. So whether you're with your friends all the time or with family or being carted from this place or that, the world kind of rushes by.
Yeah.
And so all this, although the story takes place in one day, I think that yeah, his being able to kind of stumble upon these places, whether he liked or intended to or not,
Right.
without this goal of trying to find the others, it at least gave him that opportunity to kind of have that exposure again. And kind of going back to my point about the oddities that I would pick up, I think curiosity plays a huge part in that, and you've got to nurture curiosity.
Yeah.
Whether it's somebody who is really curious about a topic, a school subject like science or math, and they don't want to keep, they want to keep growing in that field, or whether or not it's just basically being curious about anything, asking all the questions like
Right.
why, and allowing that to not be tampered Just let it grow. Let it continue to manifest into something else. So, but I really love your observation as well about being present.
The other thing that I think I have to point out here, in you talking about your own story, which is, it resonates because I grew up in suburbs and, we had kind of as children, we had free run of the suburbs until the streetlights came on,
Hmm.
and then we had to be home, right?
Hmm.
So we could, from the time that your schoolwork was done, you could be outside until the streetlights were triggered, and then you had to come in for dinner. And and that meant that we were, walking around the street, we were playing games, we were, like going over to the park, we were doing all those things. And I know that contemporary parents are very afraid of letting young children, do that unsupervised. And so I'm going to take a little bit of your time, Scott, and get on a soapbox here. And I'm going to say to families, look at the statistics. Look at the statistics for your neighborhood. Look at the stats and science around things like child abduction, the things that you're very, very afraid of. And what you'll see is chances are you're in a very safe space, and that the benefits of letting kids outside, letting kids explore, letting kids like in that environment far, far outweigh the risks. And we've had other past episodes about needing kids needing to have that outside time, about kids needing to play in a very physical way. So I just want to point that out, that while that Kip's journey in your book takes the cupcake clear across town, and most people wouldn't necessarily let a young child do that, I do want to caution against being afraid to let your children explore. That's very, very important to them. Have you, I mean, you have to think about that sometimes, about how your own experience, Scott, differs from a contemporary child's experience.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't have the luxury of being able to be a parent myself.
Yeah,
But pretty much everybody I've ever met of my age growing up now have kids, so I get to
right.
hear their stories. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of control, right? There's a lot of play dates,
Yeah.
a lot of scheduling, and being in the city of Los Angeles, actually, I live in a pretty no, pretty bustling part of it,
Mm-hmm.
an area called Koreatown. And I mean, it's sad, but the parks here are just minimal. And when
Yeah.
there are parks, they're basically fenced off for basically organized events like soccer. So kids can't even really access them. But yeah, I think that you're right. It is something that I think many parents, especially watching the news and in the stories that get the front headlines, are can be scary. So being able to kind of have that ability to kind of let it go a little bit and let the children wander um, safely might be not necessarily a bad thing to encourage.
Well, and you also mentioned earlier in our discussion here, kind of the dangers of kids getting too deep into digital devices. And so, like, one of I have to imagine that there are people who think, oh, my kid is great at being alone. They just need an iPad in front of them, right? Or something like that. And in your thinking, what's the difference between being alone and being alone with a device?
I'm going to speak, unfortunately, not as a saint, but as a sinner, because I probably need to let go of my
Yeah.
smartphone more than I do. But time alone, without the crutch of that kind of equipment, um, you know, I think it kind of goes back to what I mentioned about the imagination,
Yeah.
and not getting into kind of like meditation or that kind of
Mm.
stuff, mantras, none of that. Uh, Just the ability to look at what is around in just a very cognizant way.
Yeah.
And I'll give an example as an adult. I, I've tried to recently swap out my artwork on my walls weekly because I would have things up for years on end, and I never really even noticed it. It was just
Yeah.
there. And so basically, I started, if not just swapping the artwork around between places, but also
Yeah.
I had some things in my closet and I would put those up instead and take these things down, and whether it was seasonal or just kind of whatever struck my fancy. But it at least tried to make me feel like the place was fresh again. It was new again.
Right.
It kind of gave me something to kind of look at and appreciate. And I think with devices, when you give that to them, it's just automatically there's impulse to be able to see something before it goes away.
Yeah.
And as silly as that thought is, it's kind of like we feel like whether it's TikTok or these Instagram little snippets, it goes to the next video, and you kind of feel like there's this I don't want to say badge of honor, but you feel like you've okay, check it off, check it out. I saw that.
Right.
Oh, I heard somebody make a reference to that. Oh, I know this person now. I know, and I feel like that's pulling people into a race that number one they can never win,
Yep.
and it's just not necessary. It doesn't really ever give anybody anything to really grow from, other than just to be able to say, "Yep, saw it,
Yep.
enjoyed it."
Well, and now that you say that too, it makes me think about. Well, I had the director of the film The Cost of Convenience on, and one of the experts that he interviewed in his documentary was talking about how AI and the current social apps that kids are using actually increasingly narrow their interests rather than expand them
Mm.
because they learn what you like and they give you more of what you like.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime you're on a device that you've been on for a long period of time or using apps or using websites that you've used before, it's an increasingly curated experience.
Mm-hmm.
But stepping outside that door and going into your neighborhood, going to the park, that's not a curated experience. You don't absolutely,
Yeah,
you can't predict what's going to happen with complete accuracy when you're out there. And I
true.
think that, to your point, absolutely, we know that that is how memories are created. For example, memories we know, are created from the novel. They're not created from the repeated.
Mm-hmm.
So that's so I like your take on shifting around your artwork. I think that does that perhaps.
Yeah, wow. You brought up a great point. The algorithm
Yeah.
really does feed into our existing interests, and every now and then it introduces something new and takes you down a different rabbit hole. But you're right. So unlike like digital or analog, there needs to be some kind of new expression of like an algorithm-free experience. So
Yeah.
like you said, going into a park, you never know what's gonna strike your
Exactly.
fancy. Is it gonna be that thing? Is it gonna be those people? Is it gonna be the weather that's imposing and coming our way, or it's gonna create something new and unpredictable?
Or a pile of diamonds that were
Or,
actually
or
glass.
a
Which
pile of
again, we're not
diamonds.
advocating that kids pick up glass. That's I want to make sure that's clear. Just advocating for the use of the imagination there. So so in the sense you do have other obviously other books, and I was specifically bringing you on to talk about Where's the Party, but can you share a little bit about Where's the Party fits with the other books? Is there an arc that you would like readers to follow, or can they really get in on any of your titles?
On any of them, yeah. They're all, I mean, a few of them are holiday related,
Hmm.
and none of them are connected in any way by the same character or plot. What I do try to touch upon is, I mean, obviously a writer writes what
Hmm.
they know. So a lot of my stories have come from like, well, yeah, that's something I experienced as a child, or even as an
Right.
adult, but I kind of feel like that's something worth passing on in a different way without being too moralistic. So the stories, I do have one um, dog in my show that I go to, and I use candy many times.
Hmm.
So we mentioned the candy cane. A couple of the other ones. One of my other characters for the Halloween story was candy corn. For the Easter, it was a jelly bean, and then this one is a cupcake because there was a strategy behind that. bookstores are a tough nut to crack,
Yeah.
especially when you're self-published like I am. Doesn't matter the quality of the work. If you don't have a certain publisher's name stamped on the
Yep.
back of it, they just don't even really want to give you the time of day. But I was lucky to find quite a few candy stores that actually would carry my book for at least the holidays.
Oh.
And so that kind of became my opportunity. And I felt the stories that I had to tell weren't pandering to the shelf space I could get, but instead I felt like there was a need there for something other than just walking into a candy store and picking out candy, but you could also pick up something like, hey, how about a book? That
But
seems healthy.
make you feel ever so slightly better about all the candy you just bought, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That
And there
I
was a funny
like
story.
that.
So,
Right.
and each of them had like, so for the candy corn one, it's about diversity.
Mm.
For the jelly bean one, it's about practical jokes that cross over into bullying. So again, there's something to be said about the stories that are out there. So,
It's I learn a lot. This is a question I've asked other artists, and I learn a lot from it actually. Um, and it's how would you want your books to be used by parents, teachers? What's your if you could, have your dream? How would they be using these books, and what would their relationship be with them?
well, I think any author would be lying if they didn't say they would hope that it would encourage a conversation.
Yeah.
Not a full on dragged out kind of like all nighter kind of conversation, but just kind of like, does the child get it?
Right.
Do they see what the mistake that the character made? Were they following along easily in what they would have done differently? That kind of thing. So, I mean, if you're still, and at this age, I would think that parents are still reading with their children.
Yeah.
I would hope that that would be something that comes of it. And I really do hope they laugh. I want my stories to make not only the kids giggle, but I want the parents to get some of the inside jokes that are buried in there. So that's kind of my goal.
Right.
I want all my stories to basically make people feel better because I kind of feel like I'm an entertainer, and I do want the jokes in there to kind of tickle someone's funny bone. So
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I have I personally have there's it's a button of mine actually because I've been criticized in my own work for using words that are too big when
mm,
I'm dealing with kids, and I always say like in where the children's publishing world is held captive to these very weird, like the Flesh Kincaid reading scale. Like how many syllables you have will
yeah,
determine
yeah,
what grade level it's for. But nobody that I've talked to, including you, envisions that you're just giving this to a kid and sending them away.
yeah.
You and the other artists I've talked to about this, they mean for it to be shared, and that meaning is being created with the reader and the child together, right? The kids aren't being left to figure out all of this on their own. So I'm with you 100% on that. So speaking of the fact that shelf space is limited, how can readers get a copy of Where's the Party?
Amazon. I mean, I hate to shill for that corporation, but that's the best way. My website, which unfortunately will route them back to Amazon, is at least a good place for them to check out my body of work,
Okay.
so they can see everything all in one place, and that's mixedmessagespublishing.com. Um, and if they're in the Los Angeles area, they can go to Logan's. They can go to Sweet Awesome up in the valley. I think right now those are the only ones that have the candy or the Easter one. So
And it doesn't hurt to go into your local candy store and demand it. Why don't you have books that feature candy as characters when you're here when I'm
mm,
checking out? Anyway, I hope that helps you. Scott, I want to thank you so much for coming on Talking About Kids and for taking on, interesting, unusual topics in your book, and in particular, Where's the Party? Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
That was Scott Casperson. More information about Scott and his books is at talkingaboutkids.com. And when you do visit talkingaboutkids.com, send me a note. Tell me what you think about this episode or any episode. I read all of the feedback. The Talking About Kids theme song is by the Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans, and the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.